Well, here goes nothing. We're about 3 weeks away from week 1 of the 2022 NFL campaign, and by this time next week, I'll be in Dallas getting ready for my new position at Chat Sports to be a full-time NFL analyst. So I'll still be on YouTube. You'll still be able to find my stuff on YouTube, but as far as this channel goes, this looks like it's going to be the last video. I wanted to give you guys something really special before I head out. So in this one, I'm going to be giving my 2022 NFL predictions. Okay, so I'll be going over division by division, all 32 NFL teams, full breakdown and analysis, giving my thoughts on every single team in the NFL heading into 2022. I'll be going over awards, I'll be going over playoffs, and of course, it's all going to conclude with my preseason pick to win the Lombardi Trophy in Arizona in February. It's going to be a long one, so without further ado, sit back, relax, enjoy the show, and let's get into our first divisional breakdown, the NFC North. You saw that right. I have the Minnesota Vikings taking home the NFC North title this year, and sure, you can say I'm letting my heart get in the way of my head because I'm admittedly a huge Vikings fan, but from a purely objective standpoint, I think the Vikings are the best team in this division. New head coach Kevin O'Connell is bringing the third generation of the West Coast offense to Minnesota this year, and in my opinion, the Vikes couldn't have picked a better fit. He already has a personal relationship with Kirk Cousins from back in their Washington days. This roster is already built to operate his offense to a T, and he's one of the best in the league at putting his star players in positions to succeed, and he has not one, but two bona fide superstars to work with in Dalvin Cook and Justin Jefferson. We all know that when healthy, Dalvin Cook is one of the best outside zone runners in the game today with his elite vision and cutting ability, but what gets me really excited heading into 2022 is what O'Connell is going to be able to do for Justin Jefferson. Under former offensive coordinator Clint Kubiak, Jefferson was almost exclusively lining up outside as the X receiver, and he was and is one of the best X receivers in the game today with his combination of intelligence, physical gifts, and route running acumen. But he is capable of doing so much more, and I think O'Connell is the kind of guy that will take advantage of his wide array of gifts. When O'Connell was in LA the past couple of years, he had a similarly versatile receiver in Cooper Kupp, who ended up having one of, if not the greatest season for a wide receiver in league history last season while operating in the same exact offense. Like Jefferson, Kupp can line up anywhere on the field, whether it be outside, inside, in the backfield, and that versatility allowed O'Connell to game plan around an opposing defense's greatest weakness and scheme up Kupp to exploit that weakness no matter where he had to line up. Because of his versatility and his head coach's ability to get the most out of that versatility, I expect Jefferson to be one of the most productive receivers in the NFL this season, and quite honestly, it wouldn't surprise me if he won Offensive Player of the Year when it's all said and done. As for the defense, not only are they getting Danielle Hunter back from an injury-riddled 2021 campaign, but they added Zadarius Smith in free agency and added young talents like safety Lewis Cine and cornerback Andrew Booth Jr. in the draft to bolster a secondary that was in much need of some serious upgrades. That's not even mentioning that they still have both Harrison Smith and Eric Kendricks, both of which are Pro Bowl caliber players in their own right. When you put it all together, I think you have a team that will have one of the most explosive offenses in the league matched with an above-average defense. And when you have those two things, I think you're setting yourself up for success, and in the end, I think we're talking about the Vikings as NFC North champions in 2022. As for the Packers, there is certainly an argument to be made that they should be the divisional favorites heading into the year. They have the makings of a top 5 defense, they're going to have a bruising run game with a good offensive line and an elite running back duo, and of course they have the 2-time reigning MVP in Aaron Rodgers captaining the ship. With that being said, Green Bay has a major problem with the wide receivers they have on the roster right now, and I think it's going to put a cap on just how explosive the Packers' passing attack can be in 2022. Aaron Rodgers is a guy that has played better with veteran talent at the wide receiver position his entire career, but the problem is that none of the experienced vets that the Packers have are any good. Allen Lazard, Sammy Watkins, and Randall Cobb are not going to cut it this year, which means that they're going to have to rely on some of their younger talents, namely Christian Watson, Romeo Doubs, and Amari Rodgers to step up and anchor this passing attack. The problem with this is that Rodgers has struggled to build chemistry with young receivers his entire career. Even Davante Adams took a couple of years to earn his trust, and I have my doubts that these young guys are going to be able to build enough cohesion with their new QB in time to challenge Minnesota for the division crown. Don't get me wrong, Green Bay is still a playoff team this year. I just worry that their passing game will be somewhat limited, and as a result, I have them as a wildcard team heading into the year. As for the Detroit Lions, I think a lot of people want this team to succeed because they like Dan Campbell, but the reality is this isn't a very good football team. They have one of the least talented defenses in the NFL today, as their best player is a rookie edge rusher, Aiden Hutchinson, and I'm not a particularly big fan of defensive coordinator Aaron Glenn either. And you're probably saying to yourself right now, but Jack, they have a really good offensive line and running back duo. And although you'd be right about that, they had practically the same guys there last season, and they were still only able to conjure up 3 wins. Why was that? Well, as it turns out, when you have a defense that's this bad, you tend to give up a lot of points. And when you give up a lot of points, you're forced to throw the football a lot. And the simple truth is that this passing game isn't built to win shootouts week in and week out. Jared Goff is a one-read to check down QB through and through, and he's also one of the easiest guys in the league to confuse at the line of scrimmage. If you rotate to something exotic after the snap, Goff will almost always get spooked and move to his check down, which might be good if you have DeAndre Swift on your fantasy team, but in terms of winning shootouts, Goff isn't your guy. As for the receiving core, Amon-Ra St. Brown and TJ Hawkinson are legit, but that's about all they got. First-round rookie Jameson Williams is still recovering from a full ACL tear, and who knows how effective he will be when he gets back, if he even hits the field. And their big free agent signee DJ Chark can't separate in man coverage and has been practically invisible the last couple of seasons as a result. What this team does have going for it, though, is that they play hard for their head coach, and they'll always play their tails off no matter what their record is, which might be enough to squeak out a couple of upset victories, but not nearly enough to get them even close to the playoffs, even in a weak NFC. Then finally, we have the Chicago Bears, and man, this is a depressing situation if I've ever seen one. There isn't one aspect of this roster that you can point to and say that it's even above average at this point. And although I think head coach Matt Eberflus and offensive coordinator Luke Getsy are steering this team in the right direction from a schematic standpoint, in this league, if you don't have the talent, you can't succeed, and the Bears have very, very little talent to work with here. I'm as big of a Justin Fields advocate as you're going to find. I think he has what it takes to be something really special in this league, but this front office has given him practically nothing to work with going into his second season as a pro. I like Darnell Mooney, but he's not a legit number 1 receiver in this league, and I like David Montgomery and Khalil Herbert as a running back duo, but it's hard to do anything on offense if you don't have a competent offensive line, and the Bears arguably have one of the worst in the league this year. At the end of the day, this is going to be a bad offense paired with a bad defense, so if Justin Fields can get this team to even 5 wins, I'd feel extremely confident as a Bears fan that he's going to be the QB of the future in Chicago. Now let's move on to what was the hardest division to predict this year, the NFC East. Like I said, this was the division I had the hardest time predicting, but in the end, I settled on Philly. In my opinion, the Eagles have one of the most complete rosters in the NFL today, with a defense with the talent to be a top 5 group in 2022, an offensive line made of sheer vibranium, and a good group of weapons for third-year QB Jalen Hurts to utilize. The big question surrounding Philly heading into the year is, will Jalen Hurts take yet another step in his development after an impressive jump from year 1 to year 2 last season? When I watch Hurts on tape, there are some qualities that I like and others that concern the hell out of me. The stuff I like is that he's a plus runner, a talented playmaker outside of the pocket, and his skills as a leader in the locker room. With that being said, there are certainly some genuine concerns about Hurts' game that if he doesn't improve this year, could lead to Philly looking elsewhere at the QB position next offseason. First, he's still incapable of executing a full field progression read. He will read one side of a concept, and if that's not there, he will look to scramble and or run it himself. And listen, he's pretty darn good at that, but that isn't exactly the most sustainable way to play QB at the NFL level. Second, Hurts almost never throws the ball over the middle of the field. I don't know if it's because he can't see over the middle or if he's just scared to throw it there, but when throwing from within the pocket, he almost exclusively throws outside the numbers, which makes it easier for opposing defenses to take away what you want to do on offense. And finally, Hurts is not an accurate passer to the deep part of the field. Forget the fact that he has a subpar arm for an NFL starter, but his herky-jerky throwing mechanics and footwork prevent him from having any sort of consistency when throwing deep, which of course puts a cap on how dynamic the Eagles' offense can be when he's under center. With all of this being said, I think Hurts will improve at least somewhat from where he was a year ago, and when combined with this elite roster, I think that it will be enough to take the East this year and give Philly a home playoff game. As for the Cowboys, I don't think they're too far off. especially if Hurts fails to take that next step, but you cannot deny that this Cowboys roster regressed this offseason. I think they'll be fine because this roster is still pretty good. Dak Prescott is still the best QB in this division, and they have two coordinators in Kellen Moore and Dan Quinn who know what they're doing. But I'm not a big fan of Mike McCarthy as head coach, and although I have them getting into the playoffs as a wild card, I don't consider them a legitimate Super Bowl contender, and I think if Jerry Jones was smart, he'd fire McCarthy and hire either Sean Payton or Kellen Moore as his replacement to keep up with the ascending Eagles in the future. Then there's the Commanders, and make fun of their uniforms and their new name all you want, but this is one of the more underrated rosters in the league, and honestly, it wouldn't shock me to see them win the division this year. They have one of, if not the most talented defensive line in the game today, with Chase Young, Jonathan Allen, Darren Payne, and Montez Sweat striking fear in opposing defenses, and the rest of their defense, especially their secondary, is more than good enough to hold down the fort until those beasts up front can get up to the quarterback. On offense, it's more of the same. They're really good up front, have a great duo of backs in Antonio Gibson and Brian Robinson, and they have dynamic playmakers on the perimeter as well. But Jack, Carson Wentz sucks. Look, I get it. He's not the best starting quarterback in the game today, but he proved last season that with a solid roster around him, he can be a very successful quarterback in this league. And honestly, Scott Turner's Air Coryell offense fits Wentz like a glove, because Carson's greatest strength is throwing the ball down the field off of play action, and that's exactly what they're going to be asking him to do this season. He's not as accurate to the intermediate part of the field as the deep part of the field, and when defenses know that he's throwing, I don't trust him as far as I can throw him, which is why I have Washington third and not first in the division this year. But Wentz is better than people give him credit for. And finally, we have the Giants, and like the Bears, I think they may have the right head coach, but I don't think that they have the talent to make any kind of noise in 2022. The offensive line still has a ton of question marks. Saquon Barkley is multiple injuries in at this point, so his explosiveness and health are certainly up in the air at this point. And the weapons on the perimeter are fine, but it's definitely not enough to overcome this team's massive QB problem. Daniel Jones is the definition of a backup quarterback in the NFL right now, and he has some of the worst pocket presence I've ever seen from an NFL starter, which leads to a lot of sacks and sack fumbles being a bad offensive line. Then when you add on the decision-making and accuracy issues that he's had over the last couple of years, I think there's a solid case to be made that Tyrod Taylor is the best quarterback on this team right now, and he's a backup in his own right. If the issues on offense weren't enough, the Giants are transitioning to a make-or-break man-blitz-heavy style of defense that requires guys in the secondary to be competent in one-on-one man coverage. And the problem with that is that Xavier McKinney is really the only guy I trust doing that in this entire New York secondary. I think this is going to be a defense that gives up a lot of big plays and long touchdowns, and it's hard to compete when you're constantly giving up points and can't return the favor on offense. I think what Brian Daboll and company want to do on offense and defense has the potential to work once they have the chance to build this roster around what they want to do, but in the time being, I expect them to be towards the basement of the league this year. Now let's head out to the West Coast and go over the very intriguing NFC West. How could I not put the reigning Super Bowl champion Rams at the top of this division? They have most of their guys returning from last season, and outside of Matthew Stafford having tendonitis in his throwing elbow, the Rams offseason went off without a hitch. If Stafford and the rest of this bunch stay healthy, they are easily the most complete team in the NFC going into the season, and that's why I have them as my number one seed in the NFC heading into 2022. Moving on to the 49ers, there's a lot to be excited about, but there's also some things that concern me about this team. What I like is that this is one of the most talented rosters in football this year, and when you combine that with the offensive genius that is Kyle Shanahan, on paper this looks like a recipe for success. My concern for this team, however, is that I still think Trey Lance is a massive question mark, and based on what I saw in his limited action last year, his limited action in the preseason so far this year, and the reports coming out of Niner camp, I can't say I'm overly enthusiastic about Lance this season. Don't get me wrong, with the roster and coach he has to work with, Lance doesn't need to be special for this team to be successful. But he's had some really bad days in training camp accuracy-wise, and I think 2022 is going to be more of an up-and-down roller coaster than Niner fans want to admit. I still have them squeaking into the playoffs as the 7th seed in the NFC, but at the end of the day, I think Trey Lance is probably still another year away from potentially fulfilling his massive potential and becoming the superstar he certainly has the talent to become. One of the more controversial picks I have going into the 2022 season is I'm not all too high on Arizona this year, as I don't even have them making the postseason. I think the loss of star pass rusher Chandler Jones to Las Vegas is going to hurt this team a lot because this defense doesn't have a lot of established good players outside of Budda Baker and J.J. Watt, and the secondary is particularly concerning, especially because defensive coordinator Vance Joseph is going to be asking these guys to cover elite receivers one-on-one in his man-match heavy scheme. This is going to be a defense that gives up a lot of big plays, and personally, I think this will probably be a bottom 10 defense in the league this year. And listen, Kyler Murray is exceptionally talented, but this is one of the worst offensive lines in the NFL today. DeAndre Hopkins is out for the first 6 weeks of the year, and it's not like the other pieces they have on offense are that good either. And as for Kyler, as talented as he is, he's not someone who is particularly effective against good defenses because those teams don't let him scramble, and because he's so short and can't see over the line of scrimmage, these defenses understand that he won't throw over the middle of the field, and they'll take away his preferred options outside. Kyler can get away with this play style of scrambling and throwing to the outside and screen passes when playing against bad teams, but like the Rams showed in the playoffs last year, it can be completely shut down if you play against it correctly. Then there's Cliff Kingsbury, the head coach, who has a win percentage of less than 25% in games in the second half of the season throughout his career as a head coach, both as a pro and in college, because he refuses to make any sort of adjustments to his offense as the season progresses. Guys like Bill Belichick make adjustments mid-game or even mid-drive sometimes, but Kingsbury, he almost never makes any kind of adjustment whatsoever. And at this point, I'm expecting him to be a prime candidate to get fired once the season wraps up. And finally, we have the Seattle Seahawks, and in my opinion, I would be shocked if this team isn't picking in the top 5 of the draft next year. They have DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and a pair of talented running backs, but it's hard to do anything with that kind of weaponry when you don't have an offensive line to block for them or a quarterback to throw passes to them. Both Drew Lock and Geno Smith are bona fide backups at this point in their careers, and not even high-end backups at that. And when you combine that lack of talent at QB with the worst offensive line in the NFL, according to Pro Football Focus, then you're just not going to get a lot done offensively. I think the defense is beginning to move away from Pete Carroll's patented cover 3, and they're attempting to run a Vic Fangio 2-high safety-based defense that's very modernized, but you need a lot of talent to run that kind of defense, and Seattle doesn't have much. In the end, I'd be surprised if this pile of garbage gets up to 4 wins this year, and if I were John Schneider, I wouldn't hesitate to kick Pete Carroll out the door once this nightmare of a season eventually comes to a close. And now let's go down south to see where I stand on the NFC South this year.
You said never let me go.
Over the last decade, Tom Brady has won a Super Bowl almost every other season, and it would certainly make sense for Tom Brady to win one more ring and ride off into the sunset this year, but there's certainly been some hiccups that might make that a bit more difficult than you think. Tampa has been having some injury issues with the interior of their offensive line, and it's starting to look like there's going to be a gaping hole right up the middle of Tampa's pass protection, and if there's one thing that can rattle Tom Brady, it's interior pressure. You better believe teams are going to be attacking that hole like crazy this season, but if I know Tom Brady and this Buccaneer roster, they're going to find a way to be successful on offense and defense this season, and although that hole in their offensive line may prevent me from giving them the top seed in the NFC this year, I still think they head into January as legit Super Bowl contenders, and I wouldn't be surprised to see the GOAT add one more ring to the collection before he hangs them up for good this time. At number 2, I decided to go with the New Orleans Saints, and take note that I don't have the Saints in the playoffs this year. I think this defense is as good as it gets, and if you ask me, I think this might be the best defense in football right now. But this offensive line mixed with a loose cannon like Jameis Winston scares the living daylights out of me. For the first time in a while, the Saints offensive line has plenty of holes, especially on the left side, and we all saw what Jameis Winston looked like with a bad O-line in Tampa. I think this team is going to be heavily penalized, and I think they're going to turn the ball over way too often. And that's what I think is going to kill their chances at the postseason when it's all said and done. I like the weapons that they have in Alvin Kamara, Chris Olave, Jarvis Landry, and of course Michael Thomas. But like I've said before, in this league, you need to have a good offensive line and a good quarterback. You need to get those two right, and if you don't have either of those figured out, you're in big trouble. Next up, I have the Carolina Panthers, and honestly, I think they are right there with New Orleans, and they could easily be the second best team in this division if they get a couple of breaks to go their way. I like Phil Snow's defense, and I think it should hover around the top 10 in the league this year, but the offense I do have some concerns about. I like the fit between Baker Mayfield and this heavy shotgun spread passing attack. The only problem is I don't think they have enough weapons on the perimeter or a good enough offensive line to make this thing run smoothly. Christian McCaffrey is great and should be a home run in fantasy if he can stay healthy, but DJ Moore is really the only legit wideout that they have in my opinion, and the offensive line has a bunch of unproven young guys that we have no idea are going to pan out or not. I think if owner David Tepper gave Matt Rule one more year after this one, he could potentially make this into a playoff caliber roster, but I think old Tepper is growing impatient, and I think after missing the playoffs yet again, Rule will be fired and Carolina will have yet another head coach and possibly another quarterback next season. Then in last place, I have the Atlanta Falcons, who are still in the middle of a massive rebuild. This is another one of those teams that doesn't have the offensive line or the quarterback figured out right now, and although they have some nice young players that I really like in Drake London, Kyle Pitts, AJ Terrell, the foundation for success just isn't quite there in my opinion. Will head coach Arthur Smith get fired? I don't know, maybe. I'm not his biggest fan whatsoever, but certainly hard to judge a man based on the roster that he has had to deal with up until this point. So I wouldn't be shocked if the owner, Arthur Blank, gave him one more shot next season when he has the chance to really have a great draft next year. They have a lot of picks and really a loaded draft class. So I guess it'll be interesting to see if Smith will be the head coach next season. Now that we've gone through the NFC, let's move over to the far superior AFC and how I think the AFC North will play out next season. NFL history would tell you that the team that loses the Super Bowl usually has an off year the following year, but in my opinion, the Bengals are only going to get better, and they're an even more dangerous threat to win the title this year than they were last year. What held this team back in 2021 was their atrocious offensive line. Now that they have completely revamped this line top to bottom over the offseason, I think it opens up even more opportunities for Joe Burrow and the Bengals offense moving forward. The defense may not be special, but it is still very good, and it's not like you need an elite defense when you have the kind of horsepower these guys have on offense. And to top it all off, Joe Burrow is a cold-blooded assassin with a knack for playing his best when the lights are shining brightest, and if anyone is going to win it all this year, it might as well be these guys. Then when you look at the Ravens, I see something very unique. They don't have a ton of talent in the wide receiver room, but they are loaded at tight end and at running back, which tells me that we are going to see a lot of heavy packages from the Ravens on offense that includes 2 and 3 tight ends. These heavier formations will force defenses to counter by staying in their base packages, which only makes Lamar Jackson an even more dangerous threat with his legs because there is less speed on the field to try and contain him. Lamar is one of my favorites to win MVP this season, and when you combine this unique offense with the superb coaching of John Harbaugh, I think you get a team with everything it needs to finally get over the hump and compete for a title. Lamar has yet to show us that he can perform under the bright lights of the postseason, but I have faith that eventually he will break through, and it might as well be this year. Next we have the Browns, and I think with the whole Deshaun Watson situation, I think this team is still a year away from really competing for a championship. Outside of quarterback, they have a Super Bowl ready roster. It's just I think QB is going to be an absolute mess for them this year, and in a loaded AFC, I don't think you're going to be able to go to the playoffs without at least a competent NFL starter. If the Browns can somehow make the playoffs with a fully functional Deshaun Watson, who has shaken off the rust after missing over a year and a half of games at this point, then this team has all the ability it needs to make a run and win Cleveland its first Super Bowl in franchise history. As for the Steelers, they are another team that doesn't have the quarterback or the offensive line where it needs to be right now in my opinion. I think because of this, the offense will be below average despite the fountain of talent they have at running back and receiver. As always, I think Mike Tomlin's defense will be fantastic, but this is an offensive league, and I don't think the Steelers have a particularly good one right now. So I think Tomlin will keep this team around 500 for most of the year, but they will eventually finish with around 7 wins or so and in last place in the NFC North. Now let's move to a division that is moving away from a former dynasty and towards some really bright futures, the AFC East. In my opinion, the Buffalo Bills are going into the 2022 season as the most complete team in football. They have great coaching everywhere you look, arguably the best quarterback on the planet today, and a really good offensive line and talented weapons to surround them. And on top of that, they had the best defense in the league of all of last year, and oh yeah, they just added Von Miller to that group as well in the offseason. In terms of a pure dominance standpoint, nobody can outclass the Bills as far as I'm concerned, and they should be near the top of anyone's list of Super Bowl contenders this season. Next, I have the Miami Dolphins, and the question on everyone's mind is, will Tua save his career and prove he is the franchise quarterback we thought he was when Miami drafted him back in 2020? Personally, I think this team is going to be a very dangerous one in 2022, and I absolutely think Tua will establish himself as the QB of the future in South Beach when this season is all said and done. The amount of speed they have on this team with Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, and the rest is enough to scare any defensive coordinator. And with an offensive genius like Mike McDaniels calling the plays, I think this offense is going to be one to be reckoned with. Not only that, but the team retained their defensive coordinator from last year when they still had Brian Flores as the head coach, so it's still going to be the Brian Flores defense that has garnered so much success the last couple of years, now paired with an extremely dynamic offense that is a threat to score on literally every play. I still have the Dolphins just outside the AFC playoff picture just because the AFC is so loaded right now, and Miami has a first-year head coach paired with a QB running a brand new offensive system. Plus, the Dolphins' schedule is absolutely absurd this year, but these guys are going to make noise, and they have all the talent to beat anybody on any given Sunday. The Jets are also a young and talented group, as Zach Wilson certainly has the arm talent to ascend to superstar status, and if he does, this offense could also be very difficult to deal with. They have quietly built one of the best and most underrated offensive lines in the game, stocked this offense with a ton of fun and exciting talents, and the defense is the same way. The Jets have the early makings of a powerhouse in the AFC for years to come if Robert Saleh and Zach Wilson pan out to be what I think they can be, and Joe Douglas deserves all the credit in the world for turning this once fledgling roster into one of the most talented in the league in just a few years. Despite their talent, however, I think the Jets are also widely inexperienced and have a gauntlet of a schedule to overcome. Like the Dolphins, this team has the talent to beat anyone in the league on any given Sunday. I'm just concerned about the consistency and the ability to beat more experienced teams when it comes crunch time. And that leaves the once dominant Patriots to fall to the basement of this division for the first time in over 2 decades. I love Bill Belichick more than the next guy. I think he's the greatest head coach in the history of football. With Josh McDaniels taking practically everyone from last year's offensive staff over to Las Vegas, I think the Patriots offense is going to absolutely collapse in 2022. Belichick has handed the keys over to Matt Patricia and Joe Judge, neither of which have coached on the offensive side of the ball before, and they are attempting to transition this offense from an Erhardt-Perkins system they ran under McDaniels that relied on QB intelligence and power run schemes to a West Coast system that's going to handcuff second-year quarterback Mac Jones at the line of scrimmage and move the run game to more of a zone running scheme. My issue is not the offense itself or the scheme, it's the people trying to implement it and the personnel they are asking to execute it. Neither Patricia or Judge are experts on this type of offense, as they haven't been around anyone from the McVay or Shanahan trees, so they don't really have any idea what they are doing running an offense like this, and this roster is already built to run the offense they previously had. They have elite power blockers on this offensive line, which is part of the reason for their success last season, but by switching to more of a zone run scheme, the Pats are taking away their biggest strength, and also these linemen are probably capable of executing some zone rushing schemes, but it probably won't be nearly as effective as it was last year running more power run schemes. As for Mac Jones, one of the reasons for his successful rookie season was that he was in a perfect fit scheme-wise with McDaniels' offense. It gave him ultimate control at the line of scrimmage and could tailor the play based on what he saw from a defense pre-snap, which is his greatest strength. Now, all that freedom for Jones to use at the line of scrimmage will be gone, and with a guy like Mac who is limited in terms of his physical ability, I don't think this offense is really all that good of a fit for a guy like him. Then there's the problem of once again going into the season with practically no good receiving options. Jacoby Myers is by far their best guy they have as a receiving weapon right now, and outside of him, there really isn't much to get excited about. As always, I expect the defense to be fine, as it is a Bill Belichick-led defense, and he's the greatest defensive coach that's ever lived, but there are very few impact players on this defensive unit, and because of that, I would say their defense will be about league average or maybe slightly above league average. With an offense out of whack and a good but not great defense in a conference like the AFC that is absolutely stacked pretty much from top to bottom, and then you put on a tough schedule on top of that, all I have to say is good luck, Patriots fans. It's going to be a bumpy one. Now let's dive into what could be the most talented division in NFL history, the AFC West. After a heartbreaking end to their 2020 campaign, I think the Chargers are coming into this year full steam ahead, and I think they'll come out on top of this incredibly loaded division when it's all said and done. Justin Herbert is definitely a favorite to win MVP this year, as this was one of the league's best offenses in 2021, and it's only going to get better this year. And then when you include how much this defense has improved with the additions they made in the offseason with J.C. Jackson and Khalil Mack, this roster is as talented as any in the game today. Then I have the Broncos, who followed in the footsteps of both the Bucs and the Rams by going and getting a franchise-changing QB, in Denver's case, Russell Wilson. Russ has a very specific offense that he likes to run, and when the talent around him is up to par, and it will be in Denver, it's garnered a ton of success, and with the way Wilson works, I think this transition between Seattle and Denver is going to be as seamless as it gets. Then in third, I have the Kansas City Chiefs, but don't worry Chiefs fans, I still have them making the playoffs. But I think this defense will take a big hit by losing Tyrann Mathieu in the offseason, and losing Tyreek Hill will limit their dynamic ability to score the ball in an instant. Patrick Mahomes is still Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid is still Andy Reid, but this roster is no longer as good as it once was when they won their Super Bowl, and the rest of the division is only getting better and better. Then in last place, I have the Las Vegas Raiders, and in most years, this team would easily be a playoff team, but in this year's AFC, I don't think they make it. They have easily the worst offensive line and defense in the division, and although I love Derek Carr and the weapons that they brought in to help him out on offense, I don't think there's going to be enough help around them to really build a winner here in Josh McDaniels' first year as head coach. Now let's pivot to our last division to go over today, the AFC South. The Colts could be the most underrated team in the NFL heading into the 2022 season. Because they missed the playoffs last year and brought in Matt Ryan, who hasn't really been relevant the last couple of years in Atlanta, I think a lot of people overlook just how good Frank Wright's bunch really is. They're going to have one of the most dominant run games in the league this year, bolstered by an awesome offensive line and all-pro Jonathan Taylor. The defense was a turnover machine in 2021, and we have every reason to believe it will be again this year. And Matt Ryan is the steady vet this team has been missing the last couple of years at quarterback that has prevented them from really realizing their full potential. Not only do I think the Colts win this division, but they are firmly in my bubble of teams that I think are capable of winning it all this season. Then there's the exceptionally coached Tennessee Titans, and I think they'll have yet another successful season, but I just don't think there's enough talent here for them to make the AFC playoffs this season. I think they'll be in the hunt up until the very end, but I think the talent of other teams like the Chiefs and Ravens are going to win out over the Titans, and Tennessee will go into next offseason with Malik Willis ready to go and a new era of Titans football ready to begin. Then we have the Jaguars, and I like where this team is heading, it's just I don't think this team has enough talent to compete in a loaded AFC. And although I think Trevor Lawrence will have his moments of greatness, I don't think those moments will translate to overall success in the win column. But for the first time in a very long time, I think Jaguars fans will go into next offseason with a lot of hope for the future. In last place, I have the Texans, and as much as I was impressed with Davis Mills' rookie tape, I don't think he's going to be able to overcome this less than ideal roster around him. The Texans have some young and talented pieces on both sides of the football, but I'm just not a big fan of what Lovie Smith and Pep Hamilton are going to attempt to run on offense and defense this year, and I think it's a lot of outdated concepts that they don't have enough talent to run smoothly, and I think it will translate to an absolutely atrocious record for Houston this year. Alright, that's it for my divisional breakdowns. Let's go over who I think is going to win every NFL award at the end of the regular season. Yes, I know that this is a bit of a chalk pick because everyone and their mother is picking Josh Allen to win MVP, but how can I not with everything he is capable of doing and the team that he is surrounded with? I think he just has a massive season this year, and it concludes with him winning his first MVP of what I'm sure will be a career filled with many. Last year, Cooper Kupp won Offensive Player of the Year with Kevin O'Connell as his offensive coordinator, and I think Justin Jefferson is going to have a very similar type of season in 2022, where he puts himself in the discussion to be the best receiver in the game with the production he's about to get in this year's Vikings offense. Another chalk pick here, I know, but who else am I going to pick? Aaron Donald is probably the best defensive player of my lifetime, and I'd be a fool to pick anyone else as long as Donald stays healthy this year. Plain and simply, Coach of the Year usually goes to the coach who improves his team's win total the most from one season to the next, and the Vikings, led by Kevin O'Connell, have a chance to do just that. As you can tell, I'm a big believer in what O'Connell is doing, and when it's all said and done, I think he'll end up this year's Coach of the Year. If Christian McCaffrey stays healthy, he's going to be one of the most productive players in the game this season. He is dynamic as they come, and this is an offense that is going to feed him the rock with a below-average offensive line and receiving weapons for Baker Mayfield to work with. C-Mac is one of my favorite players, and if he stays healthy this year, I think he could have a truly special season when it comes to fantasy, and if that's the case, he's practically a lock to win a Comeback Player of the Year this season. Alright, it all comes down to this. Here are my predictions for the 2022 NFL postseason. Starting in the NFC, I have the Packers beating the Eagles on the road, the Vikings taking out Dallas at home, and the Bucs making quick work of the 49ers on Wildcard Weekend. On the AFC side, I have Denver pulling out a close one in Indy, Lamar finally showing up in a postseason game to take down the favorite Chargers, and then in a rematch of last year's AFC Championship game, I have the Bengals once again taking down the Chiefs to advance to divisional weekend. Now back in the NFC, I have the Rams taking out Green Bay at SoFi, and the Bucs once again making quick work of their opponent, as I predict Kirk Cousins won't be capable of winning more than one playoff game this year, especially if he goes up against a cold-blooded killer like Brady. Back in the AFC, I have an MVP, Josh Allen, eliminating Lamar and the Ravens at home, and I have Joe Burrow and the Bengals winning a thriller at home against Russell Wilson's Broncos in an instant classic. On championship weekend, I think Tom Brady will advance to his 11th career Super Bowl by getting his revenge over the reigning champion Rams in their home stadium, and then in yet another classic, I have the Bengals inching out the Bills and the MVP Allen to return to yet another Super Bowl. And then the stage will be set, the old master Brady going up against the cold-blooded Burrow in a matchup for the ages in the desert. And in a game that comes down right to the wire, I predict the Tampa Bay Buccaneers will be crowned Super Bowl champions, and Brady will ride off into the sunset as an 8-time champion, fully cementing his legacy as the greatest sportsman in sports history. All right, that's it. Those are my predictions for the 2022 NFL season. Thank you guys so much for watching until the end. I hope you enjoyed it. And make sure to go check out my content at Chat Sports on YouTube. That's where I'm going. I'm going to be a full-time NFL analyst for Chat Sports in Dallas, Texas. We've got a bunch of shows. We got a Cowboys show. We got a general NFL show. We got whatever your team is, we got a show for it. And I'm actually going there to host their Steelers show called Steelers Talk. So once I get settled in at Dallas, that's what I'll be taking over in the time being. I'll also be doing a lot of stuff for their partnership with Amazon Alexa. So all this stuff is super exciting. I'm very excited to get started. It's definitely a new chapter in my life, and I want to thank each and every one of you for helping that happen right out of college, right? Rabbit's Take and Sperdog football have done wonders for allowing me to get this opportunity right out of college, and none of that would have been possible without you guys. I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart. I also want to note that although I won't be posting any more videos, at least for the time being, on this YouTube channel, I will be operating my Sperdog football analysis page on Instagram. So if you haven't followed that yet, make sure to go follow me on Instagram. And then if you are a Vikings or Steelers fan in particular, make sure to go follow my my Vikings and Steelers centered pages as well. So for the last time, thank you guys for watching, and until next time, peace.